Welcome back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. Joining us for a special episode today is Matthew Van Dyke. He is with an organization. He's the founder of an organization called Sons of Liberty International. Currently, they're in Ukraine training Ukrainians. Matthew will tell us about their work. For those new to the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. Matthew, thank you so much for graciously joining us while you're in Ukraine. Could you tell us first a little bit about Sons of Liberty International, what it is, how you came to found it before we get into the current events?
Sure. Sons of Liberty International is a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. We provide free advising, training, and supplying to forces that are fighting against terrorists, dictators, or in this case, defending their country against Russia. I started the organization in 2014 after ISIS executed two of my friends, the journalists James Foley and Stephen Sotloff, and I was looking for a way to have a tangible impact on the fight against ISIS. So we started in Iraq, training the Iraqi Assyrian community, which is a minority Christian community in Iraq. We trained them from 2014 through 2017. Helped them with some of the funding for their military base, did a lot of work with them over the years. We've also done work in the Philippines, and we're in discussions to do some work in Burma as well. So we're in Ukraine, we're training forces here to fight against Russia. It's going well so far.
How does it work in terms of where you decide to place your training? Do you negotiate with the local authorities? Logistically, what's the process?
Well, the trainers most of them are U.S. military veterans. So we fly them over. We have our team here. We make contacts with local representatives of various forces in the country. I'll go meet with the commander. We'll take a look at the force, see what their capabilities are. See how their morale is, see what training they need. So they put together a list of what they asked for. We come up with a training plan that's customized specifically for them and their needs and their capabilities. And then we provide the training. This model works really well. We don't come and just tell them what we're going to train them. We ask them what they need, and we try to make everything specifically for their needs. So it's as efficient as possible in giving them exactly what they want and what they need to fight this war.
That's pretty amazing. But how does that work in terms of language skills? Do you have translators available, or do some of the veterans come already with some of the background in the countries where you work?
Some of the trainers that we have been here before. In some cases, they're already here, but that's rare. Usually we bring them in ourselves. We always get translators in whatever country we're in. In Ukraine, nobody on our team speaks Ukrainian except for the translators. So we make local contacts, hire local people. Sometimes the force itself will have translators, but usually we meet a translator in country that we like, and he becomes part of the team and stays with us.
When you first identify a particular need with the constituency of the people that you're training, how do you measure the success in terms of your providing the training?
Well, it's usually not too difficult to measure the success because we know where they are when we start. We put them through an assessment so we can see how they shoot, what their tactical knowledge is, what their medical knowledge is, and any specialty type of training that they need. And from there, we can see their progress over time. And we can run the exact same assessment at the end and see how much they've improved. But usually they're very aware of how much they've improved as well. And in addition to the skills they learn, they also build a lot of confidence. And it generally greatly increases the morale of whatever force we work with, which makes them more effective in combat and helps them to stand their ground and not rout when things get difficult.
You mentioned the issue of morale. I'm going to come back to that point. Before I do that, though, I wanted to ask, how do you choose? There are many conflicts around the world. There have been many since 2014, and even in Iraq, there's been a number of different groups that were fighting against ISIS at the same time. How do you choose who to help out of all the possible conflict zones and situations?
We look for who is not receiving help from anyone else, but who is also deserving of it. So we look for a place where we believe that our training and advising and some limited supplies can make an actual tangible impact. So we don't do missions where we can't have an impact on the outcome of the conflict. We don't do any missions that are just for show. We carefully select every mission because our goal is to have an actual impact on the outcome of the conflict on a larger scale than just the units that we choose to work with. I go and meet personally with the leadership. We do some background check on the leadership, research, talk to people in the community who know who the people are, make sure that we vet everybody properly. We don't work with any groups that have a bad reputation. We don't work with any groups that we have a concern about anything that they'll do that's morally or legally wrong. All the groups we work with are on the right side of US policy and so on, so there's no complications there. So we're very selective in who we work with. We also look, importantly, for their morale and how much they want the training. We don't want to go and waste our time training people that don't really want to be there. So we look for groups that really want us there, really understand that we can help them, and who will give 100%, just like we give 100% for them.
And do you usually, are you the one usually reaching out to the potential clients, so to speak, or do they usually find you and ask for help?
It's a mix. At the beginning, we mostly reached out to them. Now we have more people who reach out to us than we're able to actually work with because of our resources. So, we would like to help everybody, but a lot of groups that contact us, we don't have the resources to spread ourselves that far all around the world yet. But in the case of Ukraine, this conflict happened so quickly that we moved quickly and we got over here and we started figuring out which groups we might want to work with. I met with the leadership. We put this together very quickly compared to normally. I haven't left the country since I got here, so it's been a continuous process of meeting with the groups, coming to agreement with them about doing the training, getting my trainers over and getting started. And in recent years, the mission that we had planned before this, which has been postponed, which is Burma, and a mission in the Philippines. In both those cases, the groups came to us asking. In Iraq, one of the groups came to us asking. Really just the first mission in Iraq, we had approached one of those groups, and here we were approaching groups or contacts through them, and in most cases. But fortunately, in Ukraine, our reputation has preceded us some. So there's been meetings that I've had with commanders who've already heard of Sons of Liberty International, who've heard of myself and my story. So it's been a lot easier here to get doors to open for us than it has in previous missions. But we've been doing this for 7 years, so more than 7 years. So it's paid off in our ability to quickly get with a force and get training them.
Just for the audience that who may not have heard of you, if you could just quickly tell us about your own background and your story without as much as you feel is necessary.
I received my master's degree from Georgetown University in security studies with a Middle East concentration. I was originally going to work for the US government, but decided largely due to my feelings on the war in Iraq at the time, that I would rather just go see the region for myself first. So I got a motorcycle, traveled North Africa, the Middle East for about 4 years, mostly as a filmmaker. I made really good friends in Libya during that time. And in 2011, when the Libyan revolution started and NATO and the US weren't involved yet, and my friends asked me, why doesn't anybody help us? So I decided I couldn't just sit back and watch this happen to people I cared about. So I traveled to Libya, joined the Libyan revolution as a rebel fighter. I was wounded and captured on a recon mission. I spent nearly 6 months as a POW in solitary confinement in 2 of Libya's worst prisons. One day, prisoners broke the lock off my cell. I escaped from prison. I remained in Libya, went and formally enlisted in the National Liberation Army of Libya, which was the rebel force, which hadn't been that organized at the time that I'd been captured. But once I escaped, they become more organized, so I could formally enlist in the force. I was a heavy machine gunner in infantry. I stayed in the country and kept fighting until Gaddafi was killed, and left a couple weeks after that. And then, during that time is when I became friends with James Foley and Stephen Sotloff, the journalist. And I was in Syria with James Foley and John Cantley, who was also kidnapped by ISIS. This was a couple weeks before they disappeared in Syria. And I was there making a documentary film in support of the revolution. So after they were kidnapped was when I shifted my focus to creating Sons of Liberty International. And since then, that's what I've been doing.
What have been the greatest challenges to engagement with the public in this capacity, in the capacity of an organizer of such a training group?
Interaction with the public?
Yes, basically with your audiences, with whoever you are reaching out to, in terms of whether fundraising or informing about your work and the message.
We have an advantage with reaching the public because of what happened in Libya and all the media coverage of that, of my experience in Libya, and a documentary film called Point and Shoot about those experiences, that we have a lot of media access because of my appearances about that, or my appearances about when I was filming in Syria, and my appearances on American media and occasionally British media and so on as an analyst. I have a lot of media contacts, so a lot of our fundraising is conventional, traditional media driven, where I'll do a TV or radio appearance and donations will come in. I don't like social media as much, and we don't do as much social media, but we've really been blessed that our traditional media contacts are really good. So we've been doing that. The mission in Ukraine, though, has been a little difficult because some of our donors, some who donated for years, don't support our mission in Ukraine. Mostly some of their political leanings, their domestic American political leanings, where people in the Republican Party thought that Putin was our friend and so on. So they're not on board with the Ukraine mission. So we've lost some donors who were longtime supporters who wrote sometimes mean emails to me about our work in Ukraine. But for the most part, we're doing okay. Our limitation right now is our funding. We're able to bring over team members, but we really need the funding to be able to expand as much as we want to here in Ukraine.
And would you be able to share, by the way, at the end of the program, where you can be reached in terms of funding for anyone of the listeners who wishes to support your mission?
Yes, people can go to sonsoflibertyinternational.com, and it's very easy to donate online. Depending on the amount, we'll send you a t-shirt and patch. You'll be on the newsletter, you'll get the updates. We really consider everybody that supports us to be part of the team. It's really the logistics of the team. We couldn't be out here without that support. It's absolutely essential. This work is difficult, it's dangerous, and it's costly. And it's really a team effort between those who provide financing and those of us on the ground.
To get a better idea of the cost, could you tell us what an operation such as what you're doing in Ukraine, what are the costs of it for your team specifically? And when, for instance, from the moment you arrived to up until this point?
Could you repeat that?
If you could discuss the costs of operating, for instance, in Ukraine from when you arrived until now, to get the listeners a better idea of the costs that go into this venture and how and what exactly, what are the expenses and the operating costs and so forth.
Oh, our expenses are everything from buying equipment. We use a lot of training equipment. Flying the trainers over, we pay for the airfare of trainers, depending on how long they're going to stay. I have to house, numerous people right now. 7 guys I have to house and feed. We need vehicles for transportation. We had been borrowing a vehicle for a while, but now we're at the point where we have to buy a vehicle, and usually 2 vehicles for whatever country we're in for safety reasons. There's always expenses. We need equipment here. We need to buy uniforms here. It never ends. It's a team of several veterans who need to eat, sleep, and get around the country. In addition to every force that we add on to work, we need more training equipment, which is buying in America, getting it shipped over here or brought over as extra luggage when a team member comes over. You'd be surprised how quickly it adds up. It's a very, very expensive operation to run, but we do it very efficiently. I doubt if there's any group that could do it as efficiently as we do. Part of that's because of our experience, because we know what works and what doesn't work. And we do everything possible to make sure that we're efficient so that we can help as much as we can. Everybody who comes over here and volunteers to work with us is here making a sacrifice of leaving their homes and their families and their normal jobs to come over and give their time for free in a dangerous place, specifically because they want to affect the outcome of the conflict. So we give all the effort we can. Lately, we've been working 12-hour days because not only the training, but we also have the lesson planning before and after training. It's a lot of work, a lot of hard work, but we're all committed, 100% to doing it.
Since arriving, you mentioned that you choose the specific groups within the military or otherwise that you engage with. Now, we've been hearing increasingly that the US military and now Germany are planning to train some of the Ukrainian military outside the country. Are these the same types of units that you work with, or are we talking about a completely radically different type of training and the target recipients?
The forces that the US and Europe are training outside of Ukraine are specialty weapon systems, artillery, things like this. The ones that we train in Ukraine are almost entirely infantry forces that are not going outside the country and receiving that training. So if we were doing the same training as US and Europe, we just let the US and Europe do it. We help people who aren't getting that support. And our training is, if we don't provide it, they're not going to get it, because we're around. We see that we're working with forces that have had, in some cases, no training and are about to be sent to the front line. Training infantry is something that is lacking here. And we're definitely not doubling the efforts of the US. We're training different groups here and different skills as infantry, while the US and Europe train on larger weapon systems. So all of it's needed, and all of it complements each other in the outcome.
And are all the infantry combatants that you're training, are they all professionals, or are they all basically Ukrainians, or are you also dealing with international volunteers who've joined since the beginning of the war?
No, we only train Ukrainians. We only work with Ukrainians. Our philosophy is to help people fight wars for themselves and win those wars for themselves. It produces a better outcome when people are fully invested in the conflict, when they sacrifice for it, when they fight for it, when they bleed for it. Then they're more likely to put in an incredible effort after the war to make sure that their sacrifices were worth it. So our philosophy is to work with the locals and not with foreigners. The people that we train, a lot of the forces that we've trained over the years have been civilians that have been called on to become military very quickly. So most of them have no military experience when they start. Some of them on occasion do. Some of the forces that we are in talks to work with now have some combat experience, have some military experience, and want advanced training. We do that as well. But one thing that we really specialize in is in countries where suddenly there's a conflict and they need to raise a force quickly, and there are civilians who want to volunteer, take up a weapon and defend their country. That's where we really shine in being able to come in and take people who have never even picked up a weapon and within a few weeks turn them into competent fighters that can actually have an effect on the battlefield.
Do you focus on any particular part of the country, or do you have basically a base of operation where everyone who is planning to join this training comes in?
Well, so far we did work in Lviv, and soon we're moving to Kyiv, and then we'll move even further east. We are taking a strategy where we're trying to provide help in different parts of the country and operate our teams, multiple teams in multiple parts of the country. So at this time, we're continually moving eastward, closer and closer to the front, as we make more contacts and see what the needs are and find out what the capabilities are in the western part of the country, and make sure that by the time that we get east, that we have a perfect program that is tailored completely for Ukrainians, that we know what works with them and what doesn't, so that as we move east, our training just gets better and better, and the program's better and better from experience. So our base of operation has been in the west, in Lviv. Soon it'll be Kyiv, and we're constantly moving to new places as our work is needed and requested by other units.
Has there been any attempt by the Russians to disrupt these programs?
As far as we know, there hasn't been any attempt by Russia to disrupt our programs. I mean, so far, we haven't seen any evidence of that. It's something that we're aware of, and we maintain operational security, but it's not something that we worry about all day. Our security has been good so far, and Russia is having its problems in the east of the country right now. They're not, as far as we know, they're not too worried about us yet.
So this is where I want to kind of come back to the question of morale. A lot has been said about morale theoretically by a lot of military experts, analysts, and so forth. They were basically saying that morale can make or break a battle or even the war, and a lot has been said about the disparity between Ukraine's motivation to fight versus the Russian military, but a lot of this commentary has been kind of very general, and mostly from people who are Americans commenting for American audiences. You are on the ground. What have you seen in terms of morale on both sides? How accurate is this assessment by the outside forces?
It's quite an accurate assessment. The morale of the Ukrainian forces is up there with some of the best I've ever seen. They know they're on the righteous side. They feel like they're fighting not only for Ukraine, but for Europe and America and Western civilization as a whole, and for international norms and the international system. They feel like they're carrying the weight of the world in this fight against Russia, and they're perfectly willing to do it. They're enthusiastic. They come, they want to learn. There's more people that are volunteered to serve in territorial defense forces in Ukraine than there are facilities for them and weapons to go around. So there's no shortage of people willing to fight for their country here. And they have a very positive attitude about both the way the war is going and their expectations for being able to fully liberate the country from Russia.
And so in terms of the actual training, let's say you arrive day one, how long is the program generally? Is there a specific time limit? How do you know when to move on to the next location or batch of trainees? And what's the next step for them after they complete the skills? How do you know that when they are ready? What happens to them afterwards? Are they integrated into the regular military units? And
Well, the way it works in Ukraine is really two different ways. There's forces that we've worked with where individuals will be sent east to join units, and there's situations that where we train the unit itself, and the unit will deploy to the front line as a unit. And that's really what we prefer, because a lot of our training is small unit tactics, and we train them to work as a unit, to fight as a unit. And it's much better if they deploy as a unit. That said, our basic course is 2 weeks. That can take somebody from no experience at all to being competent on the battlefield. And when they get to the front, they will be some of the best trained out there after that 2-week program. That's a very accelerated basic training program. We prefer to have additional weeks to make them better. But given the amount of people that they're trying to get to the front line and how quickly they're trying to do it, it's a good training for them. It's far superior to other training they would get here. Some of them are being sent to the front with very little training at all. So trying to get as many through with at least basic training to keep them alive and make them as successful as possible, while also working with units that need advanced training, who are in the fight already and who want to learn specialized skills or how to avoid landmines and booby traps, for example, or urban warfare tactics as they go in to try to liberate cities. So the training time varies. Historically, we've worked with some groups for months. We've worked with other groups for 2 weeks. It all depends on the unit we're working with and what they need.
in terms of combat, you mentioned that some of the people who are fighting are basically civilians who have to integrate very, very quickly. How do you bypass the psychological barrier that turns a civilian into a soldier, somebody who's willing to fight, to die, and to kill for the sake of the military mission?
The audio cut out in the middle there completely.
Oh, how do you help overcome the psychological barrier that turns a civilian into a soldier who is able and willing to die and to kill for the sake of the military mission? That's not something that is inherent or normal for a typical civilian generally.
Fortunately, in almost all cases, they already come with that mentality. They've made their decision before they have enlisted in a force to receive training from us. We actually haven't really encountered where anybody has backed out and said it wasn't for them. So usually they've made that decision and crossed that hurdle before they get to us. We put them through a lot of combat simulation training involving simulation weapons and rounds that are basically very, very high powered airsoft that allow them to learn tactics and to be in simulated combat many, many times before they're in real combat. And these are high powered training weapons that are beyond normal. They will break the skin and make you bleed. They will cause welts. Of course, they wear eye protection, but they do not want to get shot by these. We upgrade the springs in some cases inside these weapons to make them fire even more powerfully than normal. So they have the experience of a type of combat before they ever end up in combat, which virtually no other training does. So they have more experience when they get to the line than a lot of people who are already up there. But that also gets them through fear and teaches them how to remain calm under pressure, teaches them to be able to think under pressure, to not run away, what to do if their commander is wounded or killed, how to treat casualties while under fire. All these things that would make an inexperienced person probably get scared and run away in combat, they're put through over and over again so that they have some level of experience, even though it's not exactly the same, having a pellet flying over your head very quickly, not quite the same as a bullet, but they have that experience of being under fire, having some threat against them, and being able to cope with it and still succeed. So that would tend to filter out anybody who was going to be too afraid to continue. They can make the decision then after they get a few welts and some bloody wounds from our training weapons whether this is really for them. But so far we never had anybody quit after that either.
There's been an effort by some people to make the conflict seem like a clash of two sides who are somehow equal in their culpability for the war, which is obviously not the case because one side invaded the other. Much of the reporting has been largely sympathetic to this understanding, but a lot of it just journalist reporting is not the same thing as a perspective from of someone who's actually in the fight and who is actually seeing what is going on. And in fact, there's been a lot of doubt being cast on the reporters because they're saying that the reporters are staying in particular zones, interacting with civilians and so forth. From your perspective, what are you seeing when you are on the ground? What is your perception? What is the message that can be conveyed from the perspective of someone who is seeing people being trained for combat, that can be conveyed to kind of dismantle these myths that have been perpetrated?
Well, this fight is very clear. It's a country invading another country simply to take its territory. There's no moral equivalency here. It's very cut and dry about who's right and wrong in this fight. Any claims the other is Russian propaganda or confused people in America who are letting their domestic politics get in the way of their common sense. There's no real gray areas that I've seen in this conflict. Ukrainians are fighting for their country and their land, and they're doing it well and they're doing it honorably. The human rights abuses and targeting of civilians is done by the Russian side. I haven't seen any of that here in Ukraine. Ukrainians are appalled that Russia is doing these things. It's really clear here. And I am confused by people that will just repeat Russian propaganda and who claim to know from behind a keyboard or in front of a camera on certain cable news networks, who make claims insulting Ukraine or insulting Ukrainians or trying to say that Ukrainians are culpable for this. It's absolutely ridiculous. Ukraine is a sovereign nation that was minding its own business when Russia decided to come and take territory back in 2014 and has held that territory and is now trying to seize more territory, killing people, attacking cities, causing a massive refugee and IDP situation in Ukraine. We know people personally whose homes have been destroyed in this. We've interacted with IDPs who live in the same areas that we live in and gotten to know them. These things are really happening, and the news reports that I've seen are accurate. Anybody who is thinking otherwise has fallen down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories or other nonsense, and need to take this seriously, because this is a fight for civilization. This is a fight for international norms and standards that have been in existence since the end of World War II. And this isn't just a fight for the future of Europe, but it's also a fight for the future of the world, where if other regimes see that they can just invade a neighboring country with no repercussions, they will do it. And all around the world, Russia supports authoritarian regimes and oppressive regimes that have been oppressing and killing people with Russian weapons for decades. And defeating Russia in this will weaken Russia's ability to support those regimes as well. So this fight in the end goes way beyond just Russia and Ukraine. This is a fight for the freedom of people around the world.
Now, let's talk about needs. Ukraine has been pushing for increased air support for increased defenses in that regard. And the response from NATO has been very strange. They have been providing some fairly sophisticated weapons, but quibbling about others. There's been this unresolved issue with the Polish MiGs that the Pentagon claimed would be escalation while providing Stingers and other deadly weapons that are no less of a military escalation. What is actually necessary at this point for Ukraine to achieve decisive victory in terms of what types of weapons and what types of support do they actually need? What should be given to them, and why and how do you respond to these claims that some types of weapons will be considered escalation by Russians while others will not? I don't understand that argument.
Right. I don't think we should worry too much about what Putin thinks or what he considers escalation. He already considers arming them at all to be escalation. And we can't continually give in to the demands of dictators, oppressive regimes, and aggressive regimes just because they hold some nuclear weapons. If that's the case, then every horrible regime around the world will actively seek nuclear weapons, and you couldn't really blame them if it's shown to them that if you have these weapons, you can do what you want. So I think that the international community has cared way too much about what Putin wants, about trying to reach some settlement that's going to make Putin happy so he'll stop. Ukrainians have a say in that also, and they want all of their country back. From what I've seen, Ukraine does need a lot more small arms. They need a lot more body armor. Most of the fighters don't have body armor. A lot of them don't even have personal medical kits, IFAK kits. There's a shortage of ammunition. There's very little ammunition to train with and not enough to use in combat. There's a shortage of small arms in general. What has been supplied, javelins, stingers, artillery, things like this have really made a difference in the war and are why Ukraine is succeeding in the war. Would a no-fly zone be effective? I'm not sure if it would make too much difference because the anti-aircraft missiles, the Stingers, and some more advanced systems have done a good job at knocking out Russian aircraft and keeping a lot of their aircraft out of the airspace to begin with. So I think they're doing an okay job on their own in that department, though I understand the concern of the Ukrainian government wanting to have a no-fly zone. But I think they're doing incredibly well without it.
By the way, my understanding that there's been a lot of confusion over the term no-fly zone, which in international legal parlance refers to essentially it would be the case of NATO planes or whoever planes actually hovering over Russia and preventing Russian planes from entering. So, but a similar operation over Ukraine would not be a no-fly zone. It would be a humanitarian support mission. It would not be, in fact, a no-fly zone because Ukraine would be fully cooperating in that regard to prevent Russian military planes over its own airspace. It would not be the case of a hostile state that had been invaded to stop it from taking action, being prevented from utilizing its own territory. I think that I think there's been a lot of discrepancy about what is actually being asked versus what is being objected to here.
Right, that's true. There would be no way to enforce Russian aircraft not flying over Ukraine unless you shot down Russian aircraft. If you just stated that Russian aircraft can't fly over Ukraine, they're going to fly over. And then you have to make a decision if you're going to shoot them down or not. It is a risky thing to do. And I think the risk of it far outweighs the benefit of it. Russia has not used its Air Force nearly as much as anybody would have thought before this war started. So a lot of their air capabilities not being used because they don't want to get shot down by anti-aircraft missiles. And if you also put NATO aircraft above those anti-aircraft missiles, you run the risk of friendly planes also getting shot down. So while I understand the concern about it, So far, and maybe my opinion would change if Russia started using more of its air force and it was making more of a difference in the war. But right now, the risk reward of trying to put NATO aircraft over Ukraine when Russia's air force hasn't been very effective to begin with, I don't think it's necessarily the right time for that, or that it's necessary, because Ukraine's doing quite well at controlling its airspace through surface-to-air missiles. But I certainly see it from both perspectives here. And if Russia were to be able to use its air force more effectively in the future, it's definitely something that should be considered. If Putin can't even hang on to some cities in Ukraine or even capture more territory in Ukraine, he definitely doesn't have the capacity to threaten other countries in Europe. A lot of what we thought about the Russian military was far from accurate. It's really a third world military. It's shown itself that for decades, when we thought Russia had a military that was capable of threatening the world, and what kept us thinking that nuclear deterrence had saved us from a world war with Russia, maybe if we hadn't been relying on nuclear deterrence, we could have just had the conventional war a long time ago and finished off Russia and not have the problems we have today.
One of the issues that sparked this whole debate over the no-fly zones and so forth was Russia's ability to shell civilian, highly populated civilian centers and major cities and destroy infrastructure, kill civilians indiscriminately and sometimes in targeted strikes, actually, and cause a lot of economic and livelihood damage. Is there anything that can be done to help prevent this, as the war is entering into this phase of renewed shelling in the east? What sort of defense does Ukraine need at this moment to minimize the effects of it?
Well, they're being supplied with better artillery now, and some of the training outside the country is on artillery. So if they have better and longer range artillery than the Russians, then they can take out their artillery. Really, the artillery is the problem. It's the Russian way of doing warfare. They just destroy everything and don't care about the cost of their own troops or to civilian lives. So the artillery will help. Providing drones, especially a Turkish drone, Bayraktar, that's been provided, has been extremely helpful. Ukraine also has its own domestic drones. If the West provided more drone technology, offensive drone technology, that would help take down the artillery. That really is probably a better solution than providing aircraft, just because the aircraft that would be provided would also be a bit dated and put the limited number of pilots' lives that they have at risk. Those pilots might be needed later. So really, anything that will take down the artillery would be really helpful to Ukraine, and making sure that there's something left after this war for people to return home to. So many cities have been destroyed and continue to be destroyed every day that people are going to return home to rubble. And Russia's strategy then, if they're going to lose, is just to destroy everything and deny that land to anybody by giving people nowhere to go home to, nowhere to live, and trying to make ghost towns out of towns, villages, and cities throughout eastern Ukraine.
There's a couple of things going on strategically that I haven't heard very clear responses to. One is that Putin aims for some sort of a victory by May 9th. What exactly does he have in mind, and is that likely to happen? And the other issue is the issue of contiguous territories connecting Mariupol to Crimea and cutting off access to the Black Sea for Ukraine on the one hand, and taking over Donbass and creating a contiguous territory to Moldova. What is the likelihood of any or some of these scenarios transpiring? What's actually happening in that sense?
Well, Putin wants to have a victory by May 9th. for the celebration of the victory of Russia in World War II. And it really doesn't matter what Putin wants, because at the end of the day, Ukrainians have a say in it also. So Putin can capture a city, maybe Mariupol, by May 9th, declare victory, and the war does not end, because it's not what Putin wants. It's Ukraine being liberated. So the war will continue past May 9th. That's really not, in the end, going to be much of a factor. And once May 9th passes, people will forget they really ever thought it was a factor. As far as the contiguous territory, the real issue is that what Putin wants is the coastline, because of natural gas assets that are right off the coast that were discovered in south of Ukraine and in Donbass, that would be a challenge to Russia's influence on the natural gas market with Europe. So if Russia is able to seize those lands and make use of those natural gas assets, it increases its grip on the European gas market. It brings wealth to Russia. It denies wealth to Ukraine. That really, I think, has been a large part of the goal of this entire operation, is those natural gas deposits. And the discussions with Europe needing Russian natural gas just show why that is. Russia believes that if it controls the natural gas to Europe, or a good portion of it, that gives them influence to do what they want and gives them some control over Europe. And Ukraine having its own natural gas resources was a threat to that dominance of the market. So I think it's more about that than contiguous territory going to Moldova. It's impossible that Ukraine and Russia would ever have a ceasefire in which Russia cut Ukraine off from the sea under any circumstances. That's not a tenable solution to this conflict. And Russia will not succeed at that. And I don't know how long they would actually be able to hold those territories. Donbass is a little easier for them because it's near the Russian border, so their logistics are easier. Both the resupply of equipment, fuel, food, and soldiers is easier in Donbass. Getting all the way to Moldova along the southern coast while being attacked from land and possibly sea is going to be a lot more difficult. But, I thought even before I came over here, I read on Twitter that I believe that Putin is going for the east of the country and the south of the country, and it's because of those natural gas resources.
As your training gets closer and closer to the front lines, what needs do you expect to encounter that can or need to be addressed further along that maybe people can help you with?
What we really need is to fly more people over for training, because we're trying to establish numerous training sites. We're trying to train larger groups. We really need to purchase more training equipment, especially the high-powered airsoft that we use. In Iraq, we had nearly 100 airsoft guns for the training. Here we have far less so far. We're trying to bring more and more in. But that's one of the things that we need to be purchasing the most. The real limitation on opening more training sites and training larger groups is the number of trainers and that equipment. So that's really what we need help with. And once we get the trainers in, sustaining that size of team with their housing, their food, daily expenses, it really adds up. So, right now we need help to maintain the program we have. And the more that people can give, the larger we can scale up and have an even greater impact on this conflict.
And what's the current size of the operation at the moment?
Right now, we have 7 people on the ground. We have another 2 that are likely to join with us soon. We have a few dozen of the airsoft rifles. We have other training equipment. We still need to get a truck of our own. We were borrowing one, but recently returned it. So really, it's our transportation, our equipment, and our personnel that are constantly growing each week. We're adding more people to the team. People can apply, veterans who have experience, especially experience training, but also veterans who just served and want to give back. they can apply through the website, as well as people making donations through the website at sonsoflibertyinternational.com.
I wanted to ask you a little bit. You mentioned the media operations earlier, that you've been able to reach a lot of media. Are you also making any documentaries concerning your current experiences on the ground?
No, we do a little filming for if we ever use it sometime, or if press want a few photos or video. We haven't been posting much on social media at all. It's something we might start doing at some point, but we don't like to post too much while we're doing the training for
Sure.
security reasons. There's no plans for us to make a documentary or anything like that. I left documentary filmmaking many years ago. Really, it's I don't even like picking up a camera much anymore. So we're really focused on the training and having it out a real impact on the conflict here. And it really isn't time for much else except for the training and running the program here.
What has been the response so far? Have you encountered actually any opposition from within the Ukrainian ranks, from maybe other units or other groups?
Any opposition?
Yes.
No, we haven't had any opposition. We've had requests for us to work with different groups. If we can build out the team, we can go with some of those requests. But really, all that we've had is more requests than we've been able to put out teams to help. So there's been no resistance. There's people showing up and trying to train forces, and some random people will come from America or Europe, and they'll go to a force and they'll so-called train them, show them a few things for a week or two, and then leave. And Ukrainians are very smart. They know the difference between that and what we do. We come out with a professional program, a curriculum. Our guys work very hard. We give them a standard of training that's better than anything they've seen. And they're eager to have it, and word spreads. And we actually, nobody we've approached offering them training has told us no. And it's just a matter of, can we get enough people and can we get enough equipment over here to be able to train with everybody that wants to train with us?
So this is, as we wrap up, I wanted to ask you about this point that you mentioned, the educational curriculum. Over the course of your operation since 2014, Soli has been active in numerous different conflicts, and obviously the terrain, the demographic makeup, the situations are all different. Is there, as you mentioned earlier, you're developing individualized curriculum for each group. How are you able to do that, first of all? And second, is there anything that you're planning to write about it, not just in terms of programs for training, but in terms of kind of military educational material for the general public as a result of these experiences?
Well, I specifically have I intentionally have my trainers design their own curriculum, because they're going to be teaching it. So I don't take something that we use in Iraq and give it to guys in Ukraine. So even when they got here, we started from very scratch. I sat in with them. I know what works from previous missions and what doesn't. So I have a lot of input into what they put together a plan, and I want to make sure all the elements are there that need to be there. But I have them design the curriculum that they're going to teach fresh for the force we're working with. We don't just take a boilerplate curriculum and try to push it on every group. So especially here, because they've been fighting a while, they have certain ways that they do things that are different than the way that we do things. And it's sometimes a challenge to find an in-between point where we can teach them things that they're going to be able to use with how they currently conduct warfare, while still giving them options of how America does it, or other European countries do it, so that they have options and so they can improve their own tactics and techniques. but again, like 7+ years of experience, we know what works. So even though we're designing something custom for them, we also have a lot of experience, and a lot of the forces all over the world, regardless of the culture, regardless of the geography or even the terrain, there's commonalities between what their capabilities are, what their aspirations are, how they're going to be able to conduct themselves on the battlefield, what the morale is, what their inherent weaknesses are from a lack of experience, and what some of their strengths are from us being able to train them fresh from the start and not having to correct bad training that they've had elsewhere. So we really are able to be in a unique position where we can combine the experience with the custom curriculum and really produce something that is extremely efficient and extremely powerful to really help them stay alive and help them kill more Russians, in this case, than other units that they're fighting alongside.
And do you think that after this conflict, after each mission is done, is there a plan for future kind of lessons learned, something more general? Not obviously you can't replicate the curriculum for a specific situation, but more of a reflection on how it was done for military academies and so forth.
We like to keep our curriculum to ourselves. We don't, because everything is so specific to a force,
Sure.
we don't want to put something out in the public that then is misused by a force. I mean, it's not just the curriculum, it's the trainers and it's their experience.
Sure.
And it's knowing what works, what doesn't work. It's really a full package, and just taking a piece of it and trying to put it out there for people to copy would not work very well in our experience. I mean, the trainers I have are great. They come with a lot of experience. They know how to interact with people. They're highly motivated because they're here volunteering and risking their lives to do the training. And if you don't have all those elements, you don't have a training program, regardless of what is on paper on a curriculum.
You know, I find it your observation very interesting, because it is actually exactly the opposite of what we would typically think about people learning and training, at least in theory, for all of these conflicts. It's almost let me put it this way. A lot of the elements in Ukraine have not been conventional warfare, because Russia has been utilizing different elements, and now you have the drones being activated and so forth. A lot of the preparation that seems to be going into understanding of conflicts is still very much based in understanding of conventional wars and conventional disciplines, and for that reason there seems to be very little patience for seeing conflicts through to the victorious, and whether in Afghanistan, in Iraq, or anywhere else, simply because asymmetrical warfare is not something US is educated to conceive as a legitimate conflict. How do you see this situation in Ukraine changing that, if at all?
Well, you know, part of what I bring to my organization is my experience fighting in Libya, which was an unconventional force fighting against a more powerful military in Gaddafi's regime, and having an understanding of how they fight, what they think, what their conversations are at the end of the day, what their morale is, what level of organization they're capable of, and planning, and what kind of operations they can execute, which is very different than the experiences of most of my trainers who served in the US military. At the same time, my trainers served in the US military, where the primary enemy that they trained to fight against was Russia. Iraq and Afghanistan were fights against insurgents. That experience is different, but the core curriculum that the US military learns has always envisioned Russia as the conventional warfare enemy that they would be facing. So it's something that my guys have studied and prepared for throughout their military careers, combined with my own experiences, fighting with forces that are unconventional, and then training forces that are unconventional for the past 7 years. That mix and putting it together actually produces something that's very applicable to Ukrainians and very compatible with where they are as a force and how they fight.
Well, thank you for these insights because it kind of finally answers my question whether anything can be done to win new types of types of conflicts. Apparently, they are winnable. It's just that people don't always have the will to do what it takes to win them. But whether they were winnable at all was a big question, and you've just answered it for me, which I appreciate. Thank you so much for the important work that you do. Again, you can visit the Sons of Liberty International website where you can donate and learn about the opportunities to volunteer, contribute in any way, and follow Matthew Van Dyke's work and the work of his team in Ukraine as well as in other places. Thank you so much. We will share the link with you afterwards, and this was greatly appreciated. Please reach out anytime if you have any questions or needs.
Thank you for having me, and glory to Ukraine.
Absolutely. Best of luck, and please stay safe.
Thank you.